Elina. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. Where are you calling me in from today?
Just outside New York City.
Awesome. In New Jersey or New York State?
Connecticut.
Connecticut. Okay, yeah. A lot of people don't realize how close they all really are, actually.
Yeah.
Right? It depends on which bridge you take. In New York City, you could be in three different states. Well, that is awesome. Let's kick off the interview at learning more about you. We want to know where you're from. You know, what did you go to school? What did you study? And was entrepreneurship a part of your story? Just kind of bring us on the journey into where you are now.
Of course. So I'm originally from Sweden. You might hear my accent. Sorry about that. And since I was 5 years old, I always dreamed of studying physics and becoming a physicist. I was really fascinated by like black holes and stars and understanding the universe. And that's actually what I did. I studied physics, and then I did a PhD in particle physics at the CERN laboratory in Switzerland, where you collide particles at the speed of light to try to create like mini black holes and things like that.
Are you kidding me? The co-founder of Natural Cycles, a birth control app, is a PhD in physics and particles?
Yes.
Women are so amazing. Women are so amazing. Already this interview is so good. Excellent. Continue. Please tell me more about your amazing background.
Sure. So Natural Cycles actually came about around 2012 when I was working as a postdoc at CERN, and we were looking for the Higgs particle, the Higgs boson. I don't know if you heard about it, but we discovered this particle in 2012, and it led to a Nobel Prize in physics in 2013 for those that had predicted this particle. But our experiment was also mentioned in the description of the Nobel Prize. So we were very excited about that.
I mean, that is like, y'all listening who are not scientists, that's the epitome. Like, you won, right? Like, you won the game. You're an awesome scientist if you do that. Amazing.
Indeed. So like that's actually how Natural Cycles came about, because I felt like for about 3 weeks I was like, floating on some clouds thinking like, wow, this is amazing. But then I was like, what should I do now? I'll never be able to top that. And all I ever wanted was to be a physicist. So I didn't have any other dreams necessarily. But I had been looking for a natural birth control methods. I'd been using the hormonal implant for like 10 years. It's like a stick in the arm. And I wanted to take it out a few years before I wanted to get pregnant, to give my body a chance to get back to normal first. And I've been looking like, what alternatives can I use in the meantime? I didn't want to use the pill because I tried the pill as a teenager and felt very bad from it, like mentally. So then through doing some research, I realized women's body temperature changes throughout the menstrual cycle, something known for long and well researched, but I had no idea about it. So that was like an epiphany for me. I was like, oh, I should have known this years ago. So I thought, with my knowledge from particle physics, which is a lot about data analytics, statistics, I can create an algorithm to find out when I ovulate, when I'm fertile, when I'm definitely not fertile. Because women used to analyze this by hand, but it can be very tricky because then you don't take statistics into account and you don't learn from previous cycles. And many things can actually affect your temperature, like your lifestyle. So I thought, here I can actually help. So that's kind of how it started. I created this algorithm for myself, but very quickly, my husband is my co-founder, and we actually also got married in 2012. So it wasn't a very intense summer finding the Higgs boson. Then we got married.
Yeah, that was a big summer.
It was a big summer.
Books.
I can't believe it's 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
But then he suggested, because we realized quickly that this is a huge unmet need worldwide. And we had so many of our friends and colleagues that say like, okay, I'll measure my temperature, you run your algorithm, you tell me if I'm fertile or not. So we decided that, well, maybe we should quit physics, because he's also a physicist. Physicists often marry other physicists for some reason. And pursue this. And, it was 2012, so we wanted to make everything into an app. So I thought like, it's probably useful to learn how to make an app, even if this doesn't work out. So that's how it started.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm like so excited to dive into this. This is such a juicy story already. What is Natural Cycles?
So Natural Cycles still today is it's a medical device for both contraception and helping you plan a pregnancy and follow a pregnancy. But most women do use it for contraception. We do analyze women's body temperature to see when they ovulate, when they're fertile, and when they're definitely not fertile.
Mm-hmm. I have a new friend in my life. Her name is Mia, and she is in medical school, took a break from med school to go do a master's in public health, specializing in maternal health. And she uses Natural Cycles as her contraception. And, but she told me that like the other students in her class don't even know about it, and this idea of you can track your periods so well that you can know the days you're fertile and not fertile. And so even people in med school are learning that that's even a possibility. So can you actually break down for us, how does that work? How can you have an app that's actually contraception and it's not something in your body, it's literally a record, and that works just as well, right? I think it's 93% effective as like hormonal birth control. So tell us, how the heck does that work?
Yeah, so once per cycle, a woman releases an egg, and that's the only time you can actually become pregnant is when a sperm meets that egg and then you make a baby. But the sperm can survive up to 5 days in the body. So that's what's called your fertile window, which is about 6 days per cycle. And what happens in your body after you ovulate is that the hormone progesterone increases, which actually warms your body. So that way, by tracking your temperature, you can see when you ovulate, and then we can calculate when you're fertile. And we've done now, we published 14 clinical studies, and we've learned so much. And it's very clear that every woman is unique and every woman's cycle and temperature curve is unique. So it's really important that to have an algorithm like Natural Cycles algorithm that really helps each woman see when she ovulates, because this thing about a myth about ovulating on day 14 and a 28-day cycle is actually very, very rare, and women are different and cycles are different.
How many cycles have been tracked in Natural Cycles?
Oh, millions and millions of cycles.
That's incredible. And you said, it's unique per woman. Is there any correlation that you found with this at certain ethnicities, or it truly is even women within the same culture, ethnicity, race, also deviate a lot within their cycles?
So we didn't publish anything yet about ethnicity, but we did one study for with more than 600,000 cycles, where we looked what correlates to what, and for instance, age matters. So as you get older, your follicular phase, which is time between period and ovulation, gets shorter. And there are many things that impact your cycle. And most women have a somewhat irregular cycle. So that's also normal.
Yeah. Even though we're calling it irregular, it's regular. Your irregularity is totally regular, y'all. So there's actually a thermometer that you sell with this app, right? So this is to track that progesterone spike and therefore the body increase. How many more degrees are we talking here in terms of heat? Like, is it like we have a fever, or like, tell us?
So it's a rather small increase, about 0.5 degree Fahrenheit. So that's why you kind of need a bit of a more sensitive thermometer. And we're also exploring, and hopefully rather soon launching, the ability to measure also on your skin during the night. So during the night is when you get your resting temperature, which is more stable. So that's why you measure in the morning when you wake up if you use a regular thermometer, or we measure during the night if we measure on the skin.
So interesting. And, how did you fundraise for this? Was this a startup? You're 10 years into this, like, what is the business behind it? Because we have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs listening. And so I'm sure they're curious, like, okay, you have all this data, like 10 years old, like, did you have investors? Is this what you envisioned it would be in 10 years? Like where you are today, like what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about, like, from a founder's point of view, the progress.
Yeah, we raised quite some capital, around $40 million in total. Our last round was 2017, a $30 million Series B, and we our app is not for free. It's a medical device contraception, so you can pay either $99 a year and then you get the thermometer for free, or you pay $13 a month and you have to purchase the thermometer. So we've now managed to grow the user base and the business such that this year we're actually about break even, which is very nice. Yeah, it took 10 years, but now we're finally here. And also it's very nice to not be a free app, because then we're more in control of, for instance, the data. Like, we would never sell users' data. We care deeply about data privacy, and especially as a medical device as well. So it puts us in control as a company, but it also puts us in control of how we handle our user experience and our users' data.
Can women anywhere in the world use this app, or is it in specific countries?
So we are cleared as a contraception in Europe, in the US by the FDA, and in Australia and Singapore. And in the rest of the world, you can use it as a fertility monitor, but not as a birth control method.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, women could use it as birth control, but you just can't claim that they can, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, got it. And I think that's super interesting how rigorous Natural Cycles has taken this. You have gotten FDA approval, CE, which is the European version of FDA. You are like, this is a medical device, end of story, period. Like, we are legitimate, regulated, serious about this. Is that something you always envisioned, that it would be a medical device, or did you think it was going to be more of just like a helpful app? Or when was that transition into we're actually a medical company?
It was really not obvious at first, but we did care about it from the start and try to figure it out. But we are the first digital product to have this high risk class clearance. So since that never been done before, it was really not obvious how to go about it.
Yeah.
And we actually, since we started in Europe, we asked, like, what type of medical device are we, if any, class 1, class 2. We're class 2 now, by the way. But there we got like bunch of different answers. It wasn't clear, but then we first, in 2015, we grew very quickly in Sweden, and then the regulators in Sweden kind of woke up, because they're like, oh, women actually do use this for contraception. You should be class 2 or class 2B, it's called in Europe. And that actually helped us to get there. The fact that the Swedish medical product agency said, women use this for contraception, you should be class 2B. That allowed us to actually become class 2B.
Wow. So you know what, this is actually a great lesson for listeners that are literally making de novo diagnostic tools, de novo medical devices, therapeutics, and they go to these regulators, and the regulators are like, we don't have a playbook for you. There's no one for you. And by the way, we haven't planned on this. We got nothing ready. What advice do you have for the founders that are faced with this, like, beast of a task, which is getting approval, regulatory approval, and there's no direction, there's no roadmap? Like, what advice do you have for them?
So indeed, we had to do a de novo process with the FDA as well. And of course, many times it felt like very long and daunting, but maybe having some patience and for sure also being resilient will help, like, just to accept that, oh no, I probably can't launch this in 2 months. It might take years, but sticking with it in the end, if you really believe in your product. And I really still truly believe today that Natural Cycles is something women both want and need, and that helps me get over those sometimes very long timelines.
That's right. Oh, what kind of women are using your app, or females in general? Are there any specific use cases for why someone would use your app as a contraception versus the pill or an IUD?
Yes, our average new user is around 30 years old. Of course, there's quite a spread, but you have to be at least 18 because we haven't done clinical studies for women younger than that. I would say most of them are like between 25 and 35 when they start. And the typical story is that they've often tried multiple different contraceptive methods in the past and often struggled to find something that suited them. They might have had side effects from hormonal contraception, or just realized like the risks that it entails, and just like myself, maybe want to think about having a child in a few years, and then they start most often natural cycles, birth control, and we often then see like a couple of years down the line they switch to using it to plan a pregnancy, which is great because then the app knows their body, they know their own body, so on average they then actually succeed to get pregnant quite quickly. Of course, not everyone, because also that is very individual. So that's kind of our typical story.
That is so cool that you are two things that are actually like kind of opposing goals, which is contraception and a fertility app in one, right? So that's really interesting. I love how dedicated you are to data. I am a scientist. Maybe it's the PhDs in us. I love data. I am like, we need a database for this. We need to research that. We need to publish a graph on this. So I was very excited to see how much research Natural Cycles is dedicated to doing for women's health. Before we get into what projects you are doing, research questions you're exploring, things you found, let's first talk about the elephant in the room, which is Roe versus Wade may be overturned in the United States. It's looking likely, unfortunately. If you want to know more about that, listeners, you know we have episodes on it. So we'll focus on how it's relevant to this interview. There has been people saying, wow, should I be deleting my period tracking data? Because potentially if abortion becomes, in some states, a felony murder charge, could they look at my data around if I got an abortion or not? So I see on your website that Natural Cycles is super committed to keeping data private and confidential. So can you just kind of walk us through that? Like, what's your experience been like having such precious data, and then honoring women that are trusting you with their data?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it is probably a valid concern, and something we also take very, very seriously. And I think compared to period trackers, we, as I mentioned, we have things that are, making us superior in this category because we're a medical device, because we actually charge a subscription fee. We are obliged to keep our users' data private, and we are not incentivized in any way to share it or sell it. So this is also our main focus. So we care deeply about this, and we are now working both on the product side and on the legal side to try to be able to tackle whatever will come our way, which we cannot know to 100% today. But we will make sure that our users' data stays private, because indeed, as you say, we have very sensitive data from our users, and they trust us with it. So it's important.
And what would you say to founders that are, creating something that, let's say it can track your hot flashes, and all of a sudden you have these graphs that are tracking your hot flashes, and maybe we find, I don't know what we're going to do, but like something crazy happens, but that data is now seemed very special and confidential. What would you tell that founder that in their early stages of development, how to prioritize data privacy, especially as they start to think about, wow, we could do this with the data, we could do that with the data, whether that be research or monetization? Like, what advice do you have for early stage founders that are going to be collecting special data? What advice do you have for them?
I think it's just important to start early on to think about data privacy and kind of work that into your processes and the way you think about data. I think being a medical device now for so many years has really helped us. And then, so when GDPR came and other companies maybe panicked, we already did have those processes in place. So that has really helped us to focus on it from a very early point in our company journey.
Yeah. So think about it early, set it up early to do it right, rather than backtracking for privacy.
I think so.
Yeah. So I love that you guys do research, because something special about the data that we're collecting in FemTech is that we are now able to discover things that scientists have yet to know about the female anatomy and biology because people haven't researched it. So tell us about your research partners. What projects and papers have you worked on? What are the things that we can discover using natural cycles data?
Yes, as I mentioned, we published 14 clinical studies today together with researchers and leading experts in the field. And there, for instance, we never share personal data with other research institutes. It's always anonymized, and we always collect consent from our users to share their data anonymously before we do so. But it's really cool to be able to work on bringing research forward in the field of women's health. So for instance, a study that we published earlier this year together with NIH in the US was a study that investigated the COVID vaccine's effect on the menstrual cycle. Because that's something women all over the world say, hey, I can feel something's going on. Does this affect my fertility? Or is it just, a coincidence? So we were actually able to investigate this with the help of our data and our users telling us when they took a vaccine and when they got the shot. And we saw that overall, like big picture, there's no significant effect. But we saw that for those women that got 2 shots in one cycle, it did prolongate their cycle a bit. So maybe there could be something about that the first shot then had to be quite early in the cycle. So there's now even more research ongoing with this to kind of figuring out it further.
How interesting, because I heard that too. A lot of friends said, oh my gosh, my period's all wacky now, like it's super heavy, or I skipped a cycle. And so that's super interesting to hear that it actually wasn't necessarily an overall effect on all females or menstruators, but if you had a certain schedules of shots, then it may have had an impact. And that's super important to know in clinical trials. Like, these are the questions that we should have in our clinical trials to find out like what drugs or vaccines are affecting females differently than males. What else have you researched or found or excited to look more into?
Well, we published 4 papers on natural cycles effectiveness, and also different country, like US specifically and UK specifically. And as a digital contraception, we actually perform this research internally every month, and we look per country. Yeah. And there is quite interesting how behavior is quite different from country to country, especially since most traditional contraceptive methods like the pill or the condom, they don't have that kind of data, because they do a study initially, say in the US, and Sweden, for instance, have never studied the effectiveness of the pill. They take the US data, but we see that US and Sweden is very different. So that's
how are they different?
Well, we see that the effectiveness is better in the US. And also we can, since we have so much data, we can also look per age, etc. We see actually the younger women, those that are 20 to 25, they have better effectiveness than maybe those that are 30 to 35, that maybe are thinking that, maybe I want to have a kid rather soon anyway. So like, I think it's a lot to do.
They're less neurotic about it, maybe.
Exactly. And indeed, like, our effectiveness overall is 98% with perfect use, meaning like you actually use protection when the app gives you a red day and tells you to use protection, that you might be fertile, and 93% effective overall. And the difference between the two is actually if you do follow the app's advice and don't have unprotected sex on those red days. So there, the control comes back to the woman, right? So like, she can kind of use the app how she desires to use it, right? So then it becomes a bit different in different cultures, different age groups, and that's very interesting, I find.
Yeah, so super interesting. I mean, I had a paradigm in my mind that natural cycles would tell you the days you're fertile and that you just can't have sex those days. I totally forgot you could
You
still
would
use
be a
a
great
condom.
user then.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, 98%.
Yeah, some of our users practice abstinence of those days. Some use a condom. Uh, a few also use withdrawal, which is not something we recommend. And that's something that we see in Sweden, for instance, a lot of withdrawal usage.
Oh, like more so than in the US?
Yeah, it seems like the Swedes are a bit less concerned about effectiveness.
Probably because they have good health care that's paid for.
Yeah,
In
I
America,
think
we're
so
like,
too.
if I'm pregnant, I'm gonna be bankrupt, you know, like.
Yeah, I think so. Like now speaking of also Roe v. Wade, like access to abortion is quite easy in Sweden.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
makes a difference.
Totally, totally. Wow. Super interesting. Yeah, that kind of stuff is just these nuanced questions that once you start to look at data, you start to see trends and then you have more questions. And oh, God bless all my interns who helped me with the annual FemTech report because I say, make this graph, they make the graph. And I'm like, oh, do you see what I see? This is so interesting. Let's ask this question, go back and do it again this way. And they're like, okay, luckily I have like very awesome, ambitious interns. Love y'all. But yeah, once I see one graph, I have 10 more questions. I love to dig into it. What's next for natural cycles? What do you see as the future of your company?
Well, we're super excited about pioneering women's health forward, and a big part of that for us in the hopefully rather short near-term future is to launch to be able to measure on the skin during the night. Yeah. We see that helps, especially women with irregular sleep, those with small babies. They maybe don't want to measure their temperature first thing in the mornings. Shift workers, and we can also then measure heart rate, and heart rate can tell us, for instance, how much alcohol you drank, if you drank alcohol, and then we can correct the temperature based on the heart rate data, which is very exciting.
That is super cool. So your consumption the day before like could potentially affect your temperature.
Yeah, exactly. And that way we can make the temperature less noisy and you might be able to get more green days, so days without having to use protection.
So cool. Wow. So cool. We have two last questions that our listeners really love. The first one is, we have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs that listen. So what's an area in women's health and wellness that you think still needs innovating?
So many areas, but if I would choose one, I would say probably menopause or perimenopause. Like, I feel like this is something really up and coming, because it's still something that's a little bit taboo and doctors don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about it or guiding women through this. And also when a woman comes in to see her doctor, they just see what happens that day. But yeah, it's also something we would love to do something in the future at Natural Cycles.
Nice. Love it. Yep, absolutely. And it's not a one weekend thing. It's like years of a woman's life. So we should absolutely help her any way that we can. And then our last question is, so what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful? And I find this question interesting asking you, who founded this 10 years ago, before the word femtech was even coined. It didn't come about till 2016. So you were up and operating for years before we even came up with a word for what we're doing. So what do you think our industry needs now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Funding is, of course, one answer. As we know, femtech companies are more often founded by women, and women get less funding on average than men. I do also feel, though, that if we are now going to some kind of recession and it might be harder to get funding, maybe we'll weed out a little bit the noise in all areas, and maybe then it might be easier to know like what's the real deal and not in all areas, including femtech. So there's pros and cons with everything. I think what femtech needs is still like what it needed 10 years ago. It still needs like more focus, more innovation, more like going forward in women's health, not 50 years backwards as we are doing right now. Like, innovation.
Yeah. It's so interesting to live in a world where today our politics are looking like we're going fast in the back, like we are running back, but we're literally reversing and unwinding all the progress. But yet in the tech sector, like we are collecting more data than we ever have. We're understanding things more than we ever have. We're having conversations, when, I started the first FemTech podcast 2 years ago. Now I'm sure there's several more. We're having conversations about stuff we didn't talk about before. So yeah, it is absolutely a tough time. I was looking up some, like, how expensive are homes in Mexico? Like, I'll be in Central Time Zone, like versus living in the US, because sometimes it can just be so heavy and so daunting. Do you have any last words of advice for our listeners, whether they be students, founders, working in the space, or just Fem fans? Do you have any last words of advice? You are what I would consider a total success story, having raised over Series B, 10 years, amazing. You have regulation, you have publications, like you just do all the things I think are amazing. So what are some words of wisdom you have for our listeners as we tune out here?
Well, I think if you are very passionate about your product and this is something that will make a difference in the world for women or in general, then just stick with it. Like, follow your passion. Like, yes, there will always be hurdles along the way, but if you really believe in what you're doing, stay passionate and keep doing it. And one day you'll get that tailwind when you least expect it, probably.
I love it. Well, Dr. Elina, physicist, natural cycle leader, amazingness. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.